1,670 miles. Remember that number. That is how far the most isolated point on Earth is from the nearest piece of land. If you were standing there and screamed for help, the only people who might technically be closer to you than anyone else would be astronauts in orbit, because they are, quite literally, the nearest human beings. This place is called Point Nemo, and almost nobody knows about it, even though for more than 50 years it has been the place where we send dying spacecraft to fall apart. Point Nemo is not an island, not a trench, and not an undersea mountain. It is a mathematical abstraction that turned into a real geographic point. Its official name is the Oceanic Pole of Inaccessibility. It lies in the southern Pacific Ocean, roughly at 48 degrees 52 minutes south and 123 degrees 23 minutes west. The nearest land is exactly 1,670 miles away in every direction, a distance a little shorter than going from New York City to Las Vegas. This point was calculated in 1992 by Croatian researcher Hrvoje Lukatela, and he did it not with an expedition, but on a computer using geodetic databases of the world's coastlines. The task sounds simple. Find the point on the surface of the ocean that is as far as possible from any shore. In practice, that meant analyzing an enormous amount of coordinate data to find a spherical dead zone where the distance to the three nearest bits of land would be maximized and equal at the same time. Lukatela succeeded. The three nearest land points to Point Nemo are Ducie Island in the Pitcairn Group, Motu Nui near Easter Island, and Maher Island near Antarctica. Each one lies those same 1,670 miles away. It is worth understanding that before Lukatela, this place still existed. Nobody knew its exact coordinates, and nobody had given it a name. It was simply part of the endless Pacific, nameless and unnoticed. Kind of like living your whole life next to the deepest pothole in town and never realizing it. And the name Nemo is not random. It points to Captain Nemo from Jules Verne, the mysterious recluse of the deep. But there is also a linguistic layer here. In Latin, Nemo means no one, the point of no one. A place with nobody's presence, which honestly sounds more like the title of a dystopian novel than a geographic feature. Now back to the paradox we started with. The International Space Station orbits at about 254 miles above Earth's surface. The distance from Point Nemo to the nearest land is 1,670 miles. That means when the ISS passes within sight of this region, which happens regularly because the station's orbit spans a wide range of latitudes, the distance from Point Nemo to the astronauts aboard is roughly 250 miles. That is nearly 7 times closer than the nearest island. So, if you were at Point Nemo, the 3 people aboard the ISS would effectively be your nearest neighbors, not fishermen, not people in southern Chile, not Antarctic researchers. Human beings in orbit, in pressure suits, flying through vacuum, would be closer to you than anyone on Earth. If you have ever complained about not having decent neighbors, just know it can get worse. You could be in a place where your nearest neighbor is moving overhead at 4.8 miles per second and has absolutely no intention of stopping. It is one of those facts that sounds poetic and absurd, and is also perfectly real. Orbital mechanics make sure of that. Point Nemo is not just the loneliest place on the planet, it is also the officially recognized graveyard for spacecraft. Since 1971, this is where decommissioned satellites, cargo ships, and orbital stations have been deliberately sent when they are brought down from orbit. The location was not chosen by accident. Its extreme distance from shore and from normal shipping lanes minimizes the risk to human beings. More than 300 objects now rest on the ocean floor in that region. Among them are Russian Progress cargo ships, European ATV cargo spacecraft, Japanese HTV vehicles, and fragments of the Soviet space station Mir, which was deorbited in 2001. Some of Mir's fragments weighed hundreds of tons and slammed into the ocean hard enough to create shock waves detected by seismographs thousands of miles away. According to planning by NASA and Roscosmos, the International Space Station itself is expected to be brought down in this same region in 2031. It is the largest artificial object humanity has ever placed in orbit, weighing more than 460 tons. Much of the structure will burn up in the atmosphere, but substantial fragments, especially those made from heat-resistant alloys, are expected to reach the ocean surface. So, The ISS, which is sometimes the nearest inhabited place to Point Nemo right now, will eventually come to rest there too, several miles below the surface. What is striking is that none of these objects ended up there by accident. This is a conscious, planned decision to use the most isolated place on the planet as a kind of dumping ground for dead space hardware. There is no single international treaty that explicitly governs this exact practice, but space agencies have developed it independently as a standard safety measure. You would think the ocean means life, plankton, fish, whales, algae. But Point Nemo is one of the most biologically poor places in the entire world ocean. And there is a specific scientific reason for that. This part of the Pacific lies inside the South Pacific subtropical gyre, a giant rotating system of currents that effectively isolates the water at its center. That phenomenon suppresses upwelling, the rise of cold, nutrient-rich water from the deep. Upwelling is what feeds food chains in most of the world's productive fishing regions. Where there is no upwelling, there is no food. And where there is no food, there is not much life. The waters around Point Nemo are exceptionally clear, not because they are clean in the human sense, but because there is almost nothing in them. Chlorophyll concentrations here are among the lowest on Earth. Satellite imagery shows the region as a dark blue, almost empty circle against the more saturated colors of the surrounding ocean. It is a kind of marine desert, a huge lifeless patch in the middle of the largest ocean on the planet. That does not mean there is no life at all. In 2005, a study documented extremophile microorganisms in the area. Bacteria adapted to survive, where nutrients are almost completely absent. Life finds a way even here, but it is life pushed right to the edge of what is possible. These microbes are survival champions no one is ever going to make a blockbuster documentary about. Point Nemo sits within the South Pacific subtropical gyre, but that is only part of the picture. Nearby flows one of the most powerful currents on Earth, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, also known as the West Wind Drift. It is the largest ocean current on the planet by volume of water moved, carrying about 130 to 140 million cubic meters of water every second. For comparison, all the rivers on Earth combined move roughly 1.3 million cubic meters per second. The weather in this region is severe and unstable almost all the time. Powerful westerly winds dominate these southern latitudes, the same storm belt sailors traditionally called the Roaring Forties and the Furious Fifties. Waves of 16 to 23 feet are normal here, not exceptional. Ships that enter this region take serious punishment even with modern navigation systems and advanced shipbuilding. Anyone who likes eerie literary coincidences will appreciate this next part. In 1928, H.P. Lovecraft wrote The Call of Cthulhu, in which he described the location of the sunken city of R'lyeh, where the sleeping cosmic entity Cthulhu lies. In the story, R'lyeh is placed at 47 degrees 9 minutes south and 126 degrees 43 minutes west. The distance between those coordinates and the real Point Nemo is only about 348 miles, which is basically nothing on the scale of the South Pacific. In other words, Lovecraft placed his monster almost exactly in the most isolated, most unreachable, most inhuman part of the planet. And he did that decades before the oceanic pole of inaccessibility was mathematically identified in 1992, 34 years after his death. And if you thought the most isolated place on Earth would at least be free of human contamination, that illusion does not survive either. In 2018, scientists analyzed water samples taken near Point Nemo and found microplastics there. The concentration was about 26 plastic fragments per cubic meter of water. That is much lower than in coastal zones, but still disturbingly high for a place with virtually no shipping and almost no fishing activity nearby. The source of that pollution is the ocean itself. Plastic from coastal regions enters the gyres and can spend years circulating along closed paths, gradually breaking down into microscopic particles. The same subtropical gyre that isolates Point Nemo from nutrient-rich upwelling also acts like a trap for floating plastic waste. The result is almost philosophical. We managed to contaminate a place that is physically almost impossible to reach. Plastic got there before most human beings had ever even heard of Point Nemo. That may be one of civilization's most impressive logistical failures. The discovery of microplastics at Point Nemo became a warning sign for scientists tracking pollution in the world ocean. If plastic can reach the most isolated points on the planet, then no ecosystem on Earth is truly protected from this kind of contamination. Concentrations in the open ocean are far lower than in coastal waters or the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch. But the mere fact that the particles are present tells you how global the problem really is. Point Nemo is extremely difficult to visit, not only because of the distance, but also because of the weather. Even so, a few expeditions have reached those coordinates or passed close to them. One of the best-known examples is the Vendée Globe, the solo, non-stop round-the-world sailing race that loops around Antarctica. The route passes close to Point Nemo, and racers regularly enter these waters. Sailors who go through the area describe a feeling of total isolation. No lights on the horizon, no aircraft trails overhead, no radio chatter from nearby ships, just storm wind and waves. In 2022, a dedicated scientific expedition traveled to Point Nemo to collect water samples, study microbial composition, and measure microplastic concentrations. Participants described the location as psychologically strange in a way that is hard to compare with anything else. The horizon is perfectly flat in every direction. There is no ship traffic, no visible trace of anyone, only sky, water, and silence broken by wind and waves. Several people noted that the loneliness there feels qualitatively different from what you experience even in the most remote inhabited places on Earth. From a logistics standpoint, reaching Point Nemo is a serious undertaking. The nearest major port, Wellington in New Zealand, is about 2,800 miles away. The trip takes around 2 weeks on a standard research vessel, and during all that time, the ship has to push through stormy southern waters. That is why most of what we know about the area comes from remote sensing, satellites, and the occasional race participant rather than from regular dedicated expeditions. So, why should anyone care about all this? Point Nemo is not just a geographic curiosity. It is something more than that. It is a visible reminder of the scale of our planet and, at the same time, of how out of proportion we are to it. Human beings built orbital stations and sent probes to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. And yet, places still exist that most people will never reach, and where our presence is felt only as a trace made of plastic and the scorched remains of spacecraft. For scientists, Point Nemo matters for several reasons. First, it is one of the few parts of the open ocean where marine conditions can be studied with minimal direct human interference. Second, it serves as a model for studying biologically poor ocean zones, those vast marine deserts that occupy much more of the planet than most popular ideas about the sea would suggest. Third, it is a key reference point in space operations, not only for planned deorbiting of spacecraft, but also for calculating public risk in case something comes down the wrong way. There is also a quieter, almost philosophical layer to this place. Point Nemo reminds us that Earth is, first and foremost, a water planet. Oceans cover 71% of its surface, and most of that surface is still difficult to access, poorly studied, and operating by rules that exist entirely without us. We tend to think about the planet through the lens of land, cities, roads, and borders. Point Nemo is a reminder of how little control we really have beyond those limits. There is something deeply human about finding the loneliest place on Earth and giving it a name, writing monster stories about it, then using it as a scrapyard for dead metal from space. That is very human. First, we romanticize emptiness, then we dump trash into it,